First of all, just a little bit more about me. I spent many years in IT engineering, so a bit of a computer nerd at heart. I've always been curious about root cause. In IT, we're taught about root cause. What is the issue? What is the bottleneck? If you're having an issue, where is the bottleneck that's causing the issue? And the bottleneck for couples varies. It could be that you have good communication when things are calm, but there's certain topics where you get triggered. It could be that you've never been taught communication skills, such as empathy or like the mirroring exercise, which I'm big on. And once you learn those skills, then things are much better in the dynamic. So it could be that you just haven't been taught things. And so I really like to zero in on and analyze. My left brain gets a hold of me at times, what the problem is in relationships. And I've been very curious about the psyche and what creates our suffering. So today I want to give you some insight, perhaps, on how for you to go ahead and troubleshoot the suffering that's created in your relationship. So just high level, before we get into Q&A, I want to talk about triggers. What is a trigger? If you think about the literal definition of a trigger, it's a device in a gun. And we're talking now about a loaded gun, perhaps, and I apologize if this reference with guns and implying violence is a little too much, but it's the word trigger. So you have a loaded gun, and a trigger refers to something that happens in the present that is upsetting, objectively, justifiably upsetting. However, the fuel behind it, the charge behind the upset, the loaded gun, comes more from your past. So I'm not saying that your partner is an angel and they did nothing wrong and why are you getting so upset? Sure, they did something upsetting, but the charge of it comes from the past. Now, sure, granted, if you've been together a long time, maybe 8 years, I get couples who've been together 25, even 30 years who come to me as clients. And so sure, there's a lot of past stuff in your relationship, but I'm also a big fan of touching on childhood, because childhood is your original school of life. It's where you learned how to love and be loved. Love languages are a very popular topic. I love that book. It's a very useful tool that at this point, most people I talk to just know about love languages, where you communicate love in a certain way. I like doing acts of service. I prefer verbal. I like physical touch, holding hands, that sort of thing. So I also like to add a spin that whatever happened in your home growing up, whether it was, like, I don't know if I could say white picket fence love, because every home has its challenges. So nothing's ever storybook or perfect in that way. But whether it was just, secure, like love, whether it was volatility, whether it was emotional neglect, maybe not even malicious emotional neglect, maybe both parents worked outside the home, and maybe at least one parent was inside the home, but didn't know how to talk about emotions. And so emotions weren't talked about. So there's emotional neglect there where no one knew how to talk about feelings. So, or whether it was something as brutal as some form of abuse. That was your original school of love. And that is your childhood love language, where let's just take the average avoidant, anxious type attachment. And obviously there are more nuanced versions of attachment styles, but I don't want to go into that today. Just like someone who's more avoidant, someone who during conflict withdraws more, shuts down, is just over it, leaves the room, doesn't want to get into it right now. We've been through it a million times. Can we not do this right now? You're always typically going to have more of an avoidant type in the relationship. And then there's the more anxious type who during conflict, please talk to me. We have to resolve this now. Don't go to bed angry. And between the two, that whole push-pull dynamic is basically describes most of the relationships. They did research and they found that I can't remember how many couples they studied, but in that result, in that research, 0 couples were avoidant plus avoidant. So in the world of accountability now, if you're an avoidant type, and I am as well, you have to ask yourself, like, what is it about this anxiously attached person. And people come up with, negative words like, oh, you're too clingy, you're too emotional, this or that. And what is it about this person who's so expressive that I'm drawn to? You have to own that there's something about them that you're drawn to. Same thing for the more anxiously attached person. Is what is it about this like mysterious kind of avoidant person that is so intriguing, that's so like that just draws you in? We can't help how we're wired and what we're drawn to because, again, original school of life. Now, a lot of people don't like talking about childhood. That's fine. I can pivot. I can work with that. But it does make the only reason that I like to touch on childhood is because it gives you a little more awareness to put the pieces together. I don't know why I'm drawn to this emotionally expressive like person who I can never console. I don't know why I'm drawn to this person who just shuts down every time we have conflict. Well, here's why. Because you were taught in the original school of life that this is love. So it's not that you want people who are avoidant and will shut down on you, and you don't want people who are just in your face, impossible to console, impossible to please. It's that it's familiar. And there's something about familiarity that is comforting. I talk to people all the time where they grew up in volatile homes, volatile households. And so they might be the type of person who just kind of feels a little bit weird when things are a little too calm and quiet. Going to bed with putting on the TV when you fall asleep, and only being able to fall asleep to shows with a lot of like gunfire or violence, or listening to podcasts about people who kill their spouses and cut their bodies up in 20 different pieces. And it's like this dark, or being attracted to horror films where you just get that kind of adrenaline rush because that's how you grew up. Is you grew up in survival mode, like 911 mode, like what's going to happen next, and it becomes familiar. And so this is not about a blame game. This is about giving you understanding of what familiarity you're drawn to. And if you are here today and you have a partner who just annoys the heck out of you and they won't listen to you, and it's them, and they need to change, as a start, think back to your start in life. For the avoidant types, who was the parent who took up all the emotional space in the room? Who was the parent you couldn't save, you couldn't console? Who was the parent who you walked on eggshells around, like, and kind of gave up at some point and just tried to like keep it tight, just not upset them? I'll handle my feelings on my own. For the anxiously attached types, who is the parent who was dismissive, who avoided you, who withheld love? These are going to give you some answers as to, oh, that's why this is so familiar. That's why, for the avoidant types, that's why, I don't like people who just are avoidant with me. Like, I'll play that game all day long. I don't need you, right? So we're drawn to people who are more emotionally expressive, more open, let's say. So, triggers is the more you understand your deepest root triggers and what some of those core wounds are, when you get into a romantic relationship, your entire relationship, the arc of your relationship, is managing your triggers. Your partner is also managing their triggers. And that is the number one goal of relationships. And, when you're single, you think you're zen and, I don't know, processed, and you've healed all your trauma and life is great. And then you get into a relationship and all of a sudden your triggers come alive. And why is it that I never get triggered with best friends, but when I'm in a romantic relationship, everything I become a different person? And it's because lovability is on the line. So for the rest of today, I want to get into Q&A about what specifically in your relationship you're having challenges with, And what are you looking to get out of today? Tell me a little bit about your challenges, why you even signed up today, your challenges with your partner. What is your communication pattern? Because triggers, it comes down to how to be loved. And sometimes even being loved is a challenge. Learning to receive love is a challenge. So I want to make sure that everyone's hearing me. If you could comment and maybe put something in the chat to let me know that you're hearing me and the volume's working okay, so we can get to Q&A. Let's see. And just let me know if you can hear me okay. Okay, great. All right. Well, I can keep talking. If no one has any questions, I have no problem continuing to talk and talk more about triggers and how they get formed, some of your starts in life. But I want to make this as useful for you as possible. So if there's something that you want to talk about, maybe the avoidant, how attachment gets formed, or anxious attachment, or navigating a recent fight, arguments, it doesn't matter if you can bring up something really light, an argument that's really light, like, oh, we were arguing about the dishes, like, or something big. For me, all roads, if you go deep enough, all roads will lead back to those original root triggers. So for me, it's very useful, even if you're talking about something seemingly innocent, seemingly innocuous, seemingly trivial, we can still get to really good stuff. So, okay, we have a question. I want to understand how to regain my confidence after being mentally abused by the words of my partner. So, when you say mentally abused, those are very strong words. And I imagine one of the questions that you have is, why did I stay? What's wrong with me? We tend to get down on ourselves, like, what's wrong with me? Why did I stay? I think, and that question tends to create a dog pile on us. Like, first of all, now you're feeling severely harmed. You're feeling abused by your partner. And then you add on that, oh, and I'm staying in this relationship. What's wrong with me? So it becomes just this vicious cycle of self-loathing. Your partner isn't treating you kindly, and you're not treating yourself kindly. So one of the things that you brought up is regaining confidence while still being in a relationship, or are you talking about a previous partner who was mentally abusive? That would be a key point, because if you're still in a relationship where you feel you're being mentally abused, then it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to regain confidence without having different behaviors from your partner. Because we all need evidence. I'm big on evidence. I mean, left brain starts going and it's all about the evidence. Whenever someone comes to me with an issue, with a negative viewpoint, with hopelessness, it's like, okay, I can believe that life is completely hopeless. What's your evidence? Is there evidence for something else? And, the power of reframes. I work a lot with cognitive behavioral techniques. I work a lot with, internal family systems techniques. When it comes to just cognitive behavioral techniques, CBT is very popular. Lots of evidence-based research, as they say, for this modality. And it's based on the idea that if you think of a triangle, that your perspectives in life, your thoughts, your perceptions, your views, your lens in life is directly tied to, if not creates, your feelings. So if I feel that if I perceive that my partner is mentally abusive, and objectively speaking, they may be mentally abusive, but for sure I perceive it, experience that. What are the feelings? Obviously, you're going to feel despondent. You're going to feel insecure. You're going to feel like just lost and unworthy. What are the behaviors? You're going to not speak up for yourself. You're not going to feel confident. You're not going to stand tall stand up for yourself and defend yourself. It's probably going to be more of cowering if you feel that you're being abused for a legitimate reason. And that's one of the key factors there, is when your partner is and or was abusive, What was your internal experience? So there's the survival mode of like fending off harmful, maybe words. You said mentally, so I'm assuming we're just talking verbal attacks. There's the, whole actions of defending your honor and that sort of thing. But when you're alone, what are the thoughts that go through your mind? Is there a part of you that believes some of the attacks of the mentally abusive partner? Some of you that buys into a little bit of the stuff? Triggers are very fueled by the fact that some of what someone says or does sticks to us. If I say to you, the person who submitted this question, if I say to you, you're a horrible person because you live in San Francisco, California. I'm just pulling a name. San Francisco. You're a horrible person because you live in San Francisco. Or if I say you're a horrible person because you are wearing yellow today. What is that about? You're an unintelligent person because you're wearing yellow today. Everybody knows that people who wear yellow are just not very smart. So basically, I say something that, when you hear it, it's like, whoa, crazy lady. Like, all right, you just write me off, right? I would hope that you write me off. Like, okay, you clearly have some mental issues or something, hang-ups, and it just rolls off your back, like water off a duck's back. Now, if someone says to you, I think you're a horrible person, or I think you're unintelligent because you said this, you said XYZ. Now we start to get into an area where things are starting to stick. They're not rolling off. Arguably, they may be saying something as ridiculous as you're unintelligent because you're wearing yellow, but something about what they said stuck to you. It like hit a bit of a nerve, hit a bit of a core wound. And that is where the personal work comes in. And if you're in a relationship where you're getting this barrage of mental abuse, who can withstand that? If you break your leg and you're trying to heal that leg and you go to the doctor and you get it wrapped up in a cast, you say, okay, I'm going to finally heal this broken leg. But then you go home and your partner like kicks your leg every day. Your leg is never going to heal. So part of it is environmental healing. Part of it is environmental, where if it's a situation of mental abuse, the question of why you're staying becomes incredibly important. And, let's take it to a bigger extreme of, let's say, there's a situation, I think all of it, maybe not all of us, many of us have known people who have been in abusive situations, whether it's mental, physical, sexual, all of it. And people, including them, are puzzled, like, why can't I get out of this situation? Why am I not leaving? I'm so stupid. What's wrong? And, people on the outside are confused, like, why would you put up with this? It all comes down to your original school of life. What is familiar? What is familiar is normal. And what is familiar provides comfort, even if it is an abusive situation. So getting to wrap it up, getting to your original question of how to regain confidence if you're still in a mentally abusive relationship, you'll never gain confidence. You just won't. It's that broken leg with a cast. Your partner's going to kick the cast every day. Your leg won't heal. You have to get out of that situation. Now, I say that with a lot of caution, because for people who are overpowered, a lot of times, not a lot of times, let me rephrase that. For people who are overpowered, safety is your number one goal. So perhaps if you're in a situation where you can't just waltz out the door and go to a friend's house and start a new life, because if that's going to put you in a situation of danger where you don't know how your partner will react, these things need to be planned carefully, and I encourage you to get support. There are hotlines for that. of any sort of intimate partner violence, and make your plan carefully. And these are things that you already know. But with regards to the question about confidence, when you're in a mentally abusive relationship, theoretically, it confidence will not grow. So now, if you have any follow-up questions, I'd love to hear, particularly if you're still in a mentally abusive relationship or if you're in a different relationship and then you feel that you're still struggling. I'm guessing that if you're in a different relationship, there's something about this new relationship that is triggering you to feel the same way. Maybe not fully mentally abused, but to feel belittled, to feel overpowered, to feel powerless, to feel insecure, to feel like you are worthless. Something about probably the current relationship is also giving you that feeling. There we have the pattern of your dating relationship. Arc of all of your relationships is probably similar. So, and this is all, none of this is blame. This is like, I feel like knowledge is power. It's key. Like just putting the pieces together, like, oh, that's why I do that. And the original school of life, when you're a child and you're a sponge and you're like learning that mental abuse is normal and it's familiar. And, oh yeah, this is okay when someone treats me this way. And it's not that bad. This is normal. People have it worse. That's a big thing I hear from people who've been abused in some way. Yeah, my arm got cut off, but that person over there, both of their arms got cut off. So yeah, there are children starving in Africa. Like, everyone always has it worse. That's the worst thing to ever say to someone, because you can always find a situation where it's worse. I don't care about worse situations. I care about your situation. It's important to validate your feelings and not pull yourself out of those feelings by saying, I'm okay. People have it worse. My parents had a bad childhood too. It's like, understandable. But again, we're talking about your feelings. So I appreciate the question. I'm sure that was very hard to even voice, in public, and I appreciate the openness. So, okay, next question. I've been with a partner for 9 years and we are really aligned at a high level. However, I struggle with communication during conflict, or even if I anticipate there will be conflict. When they express something negative or I did something that I think will make them upset, I tend to focus on explaining my intentions instead of really hearing them. Which makes my partner feel unsafe sharing their feelings and needs. It's gotten to the point where they feel more appreciated by friends or even strangers than by me because I react negatively regardless of how big or small the issue is. Our fights can become so intense and all-consuming at least once a week. That would be difficult. That'd be very challenging, once a week cycle, where we feel scared to interact. We only start reaching out again when we feel safe, but it's draining for both of us. I tend to be more avoidant and wait for things to settle, while my partner prefers to address issues right away. So classic again, you are not alone. This is most relationships, which causes me to feel controlled. Okay. So your partner wants to address issues right away and you feel controlled and manipulated and bossed around and powerless probably. I get upset, angry, and then start to shut down, go numb. I appreciate all the detail in this question. I appreciate your openness. This is so helpful. I'm sure there are many people here who relate to this dynamic on either side. So let me just deconstruct, highlight what you were saying. I want to go in sections of what you said. So you've been together for 9 years. 9 years, 8 or 9 years is when things get really real. That's when big decisions can be made. In those first few years, people break up all the time at like 2-3 years because sometimes people are dopamine chasers, where they just like the act of falling in love and the honeymoon phase, and they're just not really into the companionate phase, and things get boring. And more importantly, what happens at the 2-3 year mark is that communication is such that resentments are building up and they're not being resolved. And at the 2 or 3 year mark, it breaks many couples. Then if you can make it through the 2 or 3 year mark, you start to get into the 7 or 8 year mark. And this is another huge kind of milestone in a relationship where you've worked through many of the stuff, like the resentments, to enough of a degree to stay together. But then, how is that the weight of all the resentments? How much did you resolve them? for you explaining this cycle where you're both kind of on board with the cycle of we have a big fight, back off, tiptoe around each other. And, as long as we just are really super polite and just wait for things to calm down, and then you kind of poke your head out of the, you know, poke your head out again. It's like, okay, is it safe to come out? Okay, it's safe. And then you just kind of, you do that cycle over and over. For sure, you could do that for 9 years. You could probably do it for another 9 years. But you just asking this question, it sounds like you're getting to a point where, what's the point, right? So I wanted to mention that because you mentioned you were together 9 years, and you're not alone in really having this stuff come to a head at this point in your relationship. So you said you're really aligned at a high level. That tells me that you have very similar core values, probably about like a worldview, what's important. When I say values, I don't mean morality, but I mean like what's important to you, what's a priority, whether it's family, whether career, whether it's politics, whether, whatever you're aligned at. When you say high level, that means it's very deep for you and meaningful. So you're good compatibility wise from, what you value in life. What you're describing with you and your partner is like you have these core values that are good, but each of you comes to the table with your particular triggers, your particular loaded guns, or that partner just pokes or, taps at that leg in the cast, and boom, all the pain is felt. So let's get to more of your question. If you anticipate there's conflict, so even the thought of conflict, you're so far ahead, like 20 steps ahead of what could be conflict, because you are deathly afraid of conflict. Now, there's a reason you're deathly afraid of conflict, and that is something in the original school of life was very traumatizing. Now, I get a response from people a lot about there's nothing traumatizing in my life or in my childhood. My parents are fine. They were loving. So being afraid of conflict generally can come from not experiencing it, where maybe you grew up in a home where people put their head in the sand. I grew up in a very conservative Christian home where it's like, don't be angry. God doesn't like anger. I don't know if that's a typical Christian tenet or is this something that my mom came up with, but she was not comfortable with anger, with big feelings. She wasn't even comfortable with like super joyful, hyper happy feelings. So I learned to stay in this kind of like this middle stoic place of emotional expression. So, but the fear of conflict a lot of times can be from, and I'd love a follow up to this, if you grew up in like zero conflict, everything was peaceful, to where any sort of conflict is like, whoa, like, what is this? Like, this is too much. So it could be that you're just not used to conflict. And, when it comes to being happy and satisfied in a relationship, getting back to CBT, what are your thoughts and perspectives of a relationship? Do you believe that a healthy relationship is we shouldn't fight at all? When you say you fight and have these big, intense fights once a week, does your partner agree that they're big and intense? Because what I find a lot, and it could be that they are big and intense, so I'm not saying that. I'm just curious because what I hear a lot from couples is that from one person, oh man, like we are fighting all the time. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. It's like, I just can't please them. And then the other partner is saying like, what are you talking about? We don't fight all the time. We have like two core things that we fight about, but I can't even remember the last time we fought. And there's that big of a divide in the perception of conflict. So I'm just curious if your perception of conflict is the same, like rating, or you have the same radar as your partner, if they agree that these fights once a week are just huge things. Because you could be really sensitive to any sort of conflict for whatever reason, for a good reason. It's your conditioning of what you were trained to do. So now, there was something that you said when they express something negative, or I did something that I think will make them upset, I tend to focus on explaining my intentions instead of really hearing them. This tells me that you were a really good child, a compliant, responsible, like maybe a golden child. It tells me that you worked very hard to always like make sure you avoided criticism. this pursuit of perfection. Again, we're starting to form your love language from childhood. Be perfect. Don't make them upset. And if you do make them upset, and here's the kicker, well, they just don't understand your intentions. So, and this is what we all do, myself included, is that when our partner complains, for lack of a better word, and says that, perish the thought, we hurt their feelings, everyone on the planet, your immediate response is defensiveness. You're defending your honor. They just attacked your character. They don't understand your good intentions. Like, how could you think I was doing that because of that? No, I was doing this because of this good intention. And we just have this like desire to clear our name. And why are we always guilty until proven innocent? Because we grew up with the idea that we have to be a good person because there's a chance we're not a good person. So how you perceive criticism, it's not that your parent told you every day, like, you're not a good person. But children and their irrational logic and childhood logic put pieces together, and, everyone needs logic no matter what age you are. You have to be able to put answers to things and put pieces in place. And so perhaps your logic is that when someone is upset, it's because I did something wrong. And you create this life where you just carve out this perfectionist path. And when that path, like the spreadsheet is set, okay, I'm a people pleaser. I know how to make sure everyone's okay. And then all of a sudden you get like someone who is upset and hurt, and they just want to talk about it. And it's like, oh, no. Let me tell you all the million reasons why I'm a good person and why the spreadsheet is flawless and why we don't even need to argue right now, right? So the more you can get comfortable with feedback, the more you will be able to increase your stamina in conversations. I focus more on the mindset, the perspective, getting back to CBT, the perspective, because if you can reframe what conflict is, if you can reframe your role in the conflict, I'm to blame. I'm a horrible person. I'm a horrible partner. I'm a horrible child, horrible daughter. I'm failing my partner. If you can just reframe that a little bit, just automatically without even trying, you're going to have different behaviors where you can have a little more stamina in conflict. Stay in the conversation just a little bit longer than you would have last time. And the reason that a lot of people have trouble receiving feedback, which may involve some criticisms at times, may involve someone expressing hurt feelings, is because, getting back to what sticks, if someone's upset with you, does it mean you're a horrible person? If you inadvertently, accidentally hurt your partner's feelings, does it mean you're a cold, heartless person? Does it mean you're selfish? What's sticking to you? So getting comfortable with feedback is going to be your lifelong mantra, your lifelong goal. That, getting back to what a healthy relationship is. In my view, when couples tell me they never fight, warning bells go off. Because just statistically speaking, when you have two people on the planet who get together in a relationship, there's no way that you are going to agree on everything at every time. Of where you go to dinner, of what your values in life are, and in what priority list. There's no way you're going to not have a bad day and take it out on your partner. There's no way you're going to come out of the original school of life unscathed. Like, no, I don't have any issues. I never get triggered. There's no way. So just, on those days where a perfect storm happens, there's going to be conflict. And if you tell me that, and if you've been together longer than 6 months to a year, and you tell me that you never fight, you're telling me that you never communicate. And that will catch up with you. It'll catch up with you for sure at the 2 to 3 year mark, and for sure by the 7 or 8 year mark. So fighting is healthy. It shows that you're communicating. Now, take that with a grain of salt, because there are healthier ways of fighting and arguing and expressing yourself. And that's where, like couples work comes in. But just the act of communicating when you're dissatisfied, when you're upset, when you're hurt, is necessary for a deep relationship. If you've ever been through conflict, an argument, and you were actually heard and you came to some sort of resolution, and it's like, oh, after it, and you got to, like, you repaired it. It's not about the fact that you fought. Research shows, Gottman's emphasize this all the time. The focus is in how you repair it. So for you being so afraid of conflict, like, oh my goodness, we had a fight, we had an argument, I say, who cares? As long as you're both being not too volatile, I say, who cares? Tell me about the repair. Because when you can repair after an argument, inevitably you will feel closer to that person. Think about it, for anyone out there who's gone through a big argument with your partner and you found some way to resolve it, and you felt heard, felt a little bit validated, like they understood, they changed their behaviors, they expressed remorse, they apologized, you forgave them. Yeah, it might have been painful to go through it, but you feel closer to a person. And why? Because you showed and you exposed a vulnerable part of you, maybe what you think is an ugly part of you, a shameful part of you, and they're still there. It deepens the relationship. When you don't have any assurances that if you have conflict, that things are going to be okay, then conflict would be hugely threatening to you. So what is your perspective of a relationship? Just tell yourself, conflict is good, conflict is okay. Again, as long as it's not volatile and abusive, conflict is great, open, it's natural, because two people on the planet, you're going to disagree at some point. You're going to have a bad day at some point. So just getting used to the idea that, what's the reframe? Conflict is healthy. Conflict is showing that they're communicating and they're not stuffing their feelings and having resentment grow based on stuffing their feelings. And then explaining your intentions. It's like, the premise of that is that they believe you're a bad person. So the old perspective is, when my partner complains to me, they think I'm a bad person. However, whatever they're saying to me, the lens, we all have a lens in life. Whatever they're saying to me, they're saying I'm a bad person. I must defend myself right away. Oh my goodness, they can't think I'm a bad person. Versus when my partner communicates to me, they're telling me their experience. It's kind of like, I prefer blue, not red, versus a fundamentally flawed thing in you. So just getting familiar, getting comfortable with feedback is your goal in life. And it's not so threatening. Again, this conversation could change if you follow up and tell me, like, no, it's knockdown, drag out fights, like we yell at each other, it's slamming doors, it's horrible. It's like, okay, then my response will be a little bit differently, but based on the information that you've given me thus far, this is kind of my response now. Okay, so both of you feel unsafe sharing your feelings because both of you feel like, when people say, I hear this all the time from more of the people pleaser type, like, and avoidant types. I don't want to talk about my problems. I'll figure it out. And do you have a best friend that you could share this with? Yeah, I have a best friend I could share it with, but like, they've got their own set of problems, and their father just passed away, and I don't want to burden them. So when people say, I don't want to burden others with my problems, what they're saying is, I don't know if they'll care. Now, you can argue with me that I know they care, but we need evidence in life. Everything sounds really great in theory in our brains, but then we start to have this purely internal experience, like, I know my best friend cares, I know my partner cares. But until we experience it and see the evidence, it just doesn't go as deep. Anything can be theoretical in our mind, but we need the evidence. We need to allow people, set people up, allow them to love us. And receiving love is a very hard thing to do for many people, especially avoidance. And not just avoidance, but anxious types as well. Receiving love is very tough to do, especially if you're the type where you prefer to be loving or helping the other person, and receiving is hard to do. You can ask yourself this question, like, how do you feel about compliments? How do you feel about praise? How do you feel about people being your cheerleader? Is it like, no, that's okay? Do what are you rejecting at even a small level? That'll give you an idea of what you reject at a deeper level. So, oh, you also said in the question, it's gotten to the point where they feel more appreciated by friends or even strangers than by me because I react negatively, regardless how big or small the issue is. Yeah, creating safety, it's important. And, it's vulnerability breeds vulnerability. So if one of you can create the experience of a safe space. You hear that phrase all the time, a safe space. And that just means, learning to just put your defensiveness on hold just for a minute, put your explaining of how you're a good person on hold just for a minute, just be able to hear them and give them that platform to express themselves and to empathize with them, which means just focus on their emotions. This is all what's entailed in the mirroring empathy exercise. And learning those skills is hugely valuable because, especially when it comes to people who are emotionally expressive, a lot of times people who are more avoidant think that, oh my goodness, if I validate anything they're saying, if I empathize or mirror what they're saying, that's just going to give them more fuel and they are just going to get even more upset. And I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to I'm just trying to keep it tight. I'm just going to not not throw them a bone because it'll just blow into something else. And that's actually not true from what I've seen. I find that when people, especially emotionally expressive people, when they're just given a nod, like, oh, that sucks. Yeah, that must be really hard. I can totally understand why you're upset about that. A lot of times they're done in a few minutes. Like, yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks. But the more you withhold, like the pull, the more they're going to push. Like, what do you mean? Don't you hear? Like, don't you understand? Like, what? And the more they're going to express their point of view and justify their position. So don't be surprised in how empathy and validation can really shorten arguments. I see it happen all the time. So that's just kind of my initial response to this question. When you have the avoidant where one person wants to address right away, one person needs a break. Breaks are good, by the way. You are entitled to have a break. The problem is that most people who take a break don't ever want to come back to it again. Just kind of like what you described, like, okay, we're just going to go to our separate corners, just wait for things to blow over. Okay, is it safe to come out? Okay, you come out, you kind of tiptoe around each other, and no one ever just talks about it. So that's why people who don't want to break don't want to let you go out of the room because they know they'll never see you again on this topic. So they try to get what they can. So breaks are good. If you can communicate whatever you want to communicate, like, hey, you know what? I love you, but you are really pissing me off right now and I need a break from you, or however you want to phrase it. I need a break. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I can't do this right now. I'm going to say something I'm going to regret. De-escalation skills is another skill that's hugely valuable, which is separate from any sort of communication ability. Learning to de-escalate is a skill, especially when you're dealing with triggers. But taking a break is good if you can just have more communication around the break. Take a break let's reconvene in a few hours. Let's reconvene at 8 p.m. At 8 p.m., if you still don't feel like talking, you are entitled to not talk, but just add some communication around it. Because when it comes to avoidant, anxious, it's going to be compromise. Neither of you are going to get 100% of what you want. So the avoidant person gets a break, but maybe not as long a break as you want. The avoidant person doesn't want to talk about things, but tries to find some stamina to talk about things a little bit longer. The anxiously attached person doesn't want the break, but will go along with a certain amount of break. Like the anxious attached person wants to talk about it for much longer than this person over here, but they'll go ahead and talk about it for this long instead. So it's all about compromise. But your point about creating a safe space, that takes more practice, and it takes understanding just the tenets of empathy. Of when you're empathizing with someone, you're focusing on their emotions. you're valid when you say validating feelings, you're validating their end result, not their thoughts. And this is where confusion comes in. This is one of the big things that I go through when I work with couples, and what we're going to spend a lot of time on at the weekend retreat is the difference between feelings and thoughts. So when I ask somebody how they're feeling, here's how most people talk is, yeah, I feel like my partner is really selfish and they just spend all their time on their phone. They don't acknowledge what I'm doing with the kids. They just complain, they check out, and they all that, so on and so on. And yeah, it's just how I feel. Or yeah, I feel that you're being really manipulative and controlling, and you're being really insensitive, and I'm really tired of it. And yeah, but that's just how I feel. So you can't do anything because that's my truth. That's how I feel. Now, in those statements, what you were expressing, the underbelly of it, there were emotions there, but there were no feelings that were communicated. So people always typically communicate in thoughts. People typically communicate their worldview, their view of themselves, their view of others. Why don't people communicate? Like the difference would be, hey, when you're on your phone all the time, I feel lonely. I feel kind of like I'm like worthless, like I'm not worth talking to. I feel kind of stupid because I'm not stimulating for you to talk to. So I feel ignorant. I feel ashamed that you don't want to have a conversation with me. So, or, in the other situation, like, hey, when you told me to do that, I felt really powerless. I felt insecure. I felt, whatever it is, like you can see the difference when you start to use emotions in your communication. It's a whole new ball game. And the reason people don't talk in feelings is because it's too vulnerable. Talking about your feelings is way too vulnerable. But the feelings wheel is your best friend, especially for all the avoidance out there. The feelings wheel, and for anxiously attached people, the feelings wheel is your friend. Because when you can talk in emotions, yeah, it's scarier. Yeah, it's more vulnerable, but it has less of a chance of triggering your partner. Because if you say, I feel lonely, sure, it's possible that your partner might still get triggered into feeling like, oh, I'm failing you, I'm a bad person. But I feel lonely is much different than you're selfish and, whatever. So it's less accusatory. So that's just one of the main tenets of expressing your feelings. They always say, use I statements. It's like, well, I feel that you're a jerk. That's just how I feel. It's like, okay, that's not really using the I statements correctly. I statements are all about, I feel the emotion. Focus on emotions. It's very vulnerable, but it will help make the conversations, the arguments more productive. So, but thank you for your question. Let's see, let's move on here. And we're coming up on the hour, so I'm going to try to move a little more quickly. My partner calls me names when they're upset. How do I redirect the conversation towards resolution? So name calling is, there's a point in I was going to say just not good, but that's stating the obvious. Name calling is a point in the conversation where you're really starting to move towards abusive, if not already there, kind of behaviors, where there's a point in arguments where people will pull out all the stops. Now, pulling out all the stops can look different ways. But it'll generally come out like people hit below the belt, as they say, play dirty, go to that place, weaponize your vulnerabilities from the past. People go to ugly places when they feel like they're losing the argument. And it's a very dangerous place to go for the relationship because now you're starting to get into the area of contempt. And contempt is the relationship killer. And when you get to the point of, it starts out as something a little less blatant. It starts out as like sighing, rolling your eye, like more passive communication, sighing, roll, indirect, sighing, rolling your eyes, sarcasm. Sarcasm is like you're not saying directly what you're upset about, but you're sarcastically saying it. You're mocking the other person. Then it starts to evolve into more direct things like berating, name calling. You're so stupid. Like, what's wrong with you? And that's a very contemptuous place to be, and it will kill your relationship. So, calling me names, like obviously there are different cultural um, ideas around name calling. Some, whether it's, you know, family environment that you grew up with, where name calling was just like, it's just what we do. It's no big deal. Like, sure, okay, I can go with that a little bit, but not much. It's just, I can't stress enough how this dynamic in your relationship is really moving towards contempt. And this never ends well. So the question becomes that right before the part that your partner is calling you names, and this is a question for them, not really for you, is what is so upsetting? And, you know, people throw up these, they pull the fire alarm, as I like to say, when they feel like they're cornered. Maybe they feel like they're a bad person. Maybe they feel like they can't say anything. Maybe they feel like what they did actually was a little bit bad and they don't want to admit a mistake. Or they feel just cornered somehow. And then how do they pull the fire alarm to get out of the situation? They pull the fire alarm by, what I said about contempt. You pull the fire alarm by saying, well, maybe we shouldn't even be together. Maybe we should just break up. It's all of these are ways of deflecting when you feel like you are basically losing the argument or you feel like the conflict is too much and you just want out. Pulling the fire alarm is you want out of the argument. You're going to do whatever you can to quiet your partner. And this is an area where things get really extreme and evolve over time into abusive behaviors. And so I just want to call that out and have you both be really aware of that. But your question, how do I redirect the conversation towards resolution? I think it's valid to talk about the name calling directly and how you feel in emotions when you're called certain names. I feel disrespected. I feel like it reminds me of things. What happened in your original school of life? Were you ever called names before? This is the first time you've been called names? Were you ever berated like this before? How has name calling become familiar, acceptable in some way to you? What happened in your conditioning? How were you trained in life, the school of life? How were you trained that this is okay and that all you need to do is like redirect them and just ignore the fact that they called you names? So that's one recommendation, is to have a direct conversation just about the name calling itself, just about how you two argue. Then there's the, redirect the conversation towards resolution. That gets more into like being able to express needs, being able to empathize, mirror, listen to each other. But if someone is at the point of where they're name calling, they're fully in some sort of trigger, they're fully in pulling the fire alarm, trying to end the conversation. And at that point, they're not really into, hey, let's figure out how to have a productive conversation. They're fully in fight or flight mode and they've gone on the attack. And at that point in the conversation, you need to take a break. You, the person who submitted the question, needs to find a way to take space and revisit it at a different time. Because I have found that at that point in the conversation, when someone's at that state, it's not going to improve. So that would be my recommendation, is to address how you argue and specifically being called names. Okay, next question. How do you get the avoidant partner to talk out issues? We never come to a resolution. All of our problems are swept under the rug. but the same issues present often. My partner gets easily triggered. I don't mean to make him angry. The way he responds when triggered feels disrespectful. So at that point, I'm triggered. Then it just blows out of proportion. You're highlighting a really important point in couples conflict resolution, and that is people generally learn the mirroring exercise, learn empathy exercises, learn how to talk in feelings and emotions very easily. Everyone's intelligent. It's not that difficult. It's not that complex. But then you get to a point in the relationship, like you have these skills, you've proven that you know how to do it. But during conflict, all the communication skills go out the window. Why? Once again, we're back to triggers. So in conflict resolution for couples, at some point, if you find that you're at this point where on a good day, you two can talk about things and you feel heard and you feel validated and people are expressing things, you come up with solutions and things are like you, for the most part, you're good. But then you have these things, these topics, these same fights that keep happening over and over. At this point, we're no longer talking about, well, we just need to learn mirroring skills better. It's not about mirroring skills. It's not about communication skills. It's about your personal triggers. And this is personal work. This is, I don't like to overuse the word trauma, but this is basically working on trauma responses. Because when you get pushed to the point that you're in fight or flight, just physically at a physical level, like the amygdala set off the alarm bells, the nervous system is reacting, you're in survival mode. And when the body physically is in survival mode, the body is not thinking about storing memory. So you'll find that if you were a person who didn't have a lot of memory from childhood, you're telling me that you were in survival mode a lot, because the body can't be in survival mode and store memory in memory banks at the same time. So, and executive function goes out the window when you're in fight or flight. So just being able to talk through things when you're in fully triggered mode, that's why de-escalation is so important. Now, once you come back to the table, it's important to not just pick up where you left off, but it's important to bring new information to the table. When I said vulnerability breeds vulnerability, if you can come to the table and own the loaded gun part of the conversation instead of the triggered part of the conversation. Everybody wants to focus on the trigger. Well, you said this, you did this, and you made me feel like a bad person. What's the loaded gun? Which parent is your partner reminding you of when they say that? Which ex is reminding you of that whole experience when they said that? Go back to the original school of life. That's the root of it. But if you're at that point where, for the most part, you're good, but you just have these same fights over and over, you're basically having your core wounds come out over and over. Now, I'm going to do a workshop probably dedicated to this particular point of addressing your core wounds with regards to conflict resolution. But high level, it's basically if you can start to think of your trauma responses as start to distance yourself from it just a little bit. Because all of us have concluded that, let's just take anger, for example. I am an angry person. I have anger issues. I will always struggle with it. It's just who I am. Me would argue that no, you as an adult are competent, confident, securely attached, and rational, and you don't have anger issues. But there's a piece of you, a part of you, an aspect of you that does have anger issues. So just language is so important. If you can start to refer to yourself in that way, like instead of I am an angry person, just something I have to deal with, instead saying, oh, there's a piece of me that struggles with anger. Now you've created enough distance where you can start to look at that. We all have behaviors and things about us that we feel ashamed about. Every person who has anger issues is ashamed about it. Every person who feels like they're too emotional is ashamed about it. Every person who feels like they're that they shut down during conversations and they're being called cold and heartless is ashamed about being cold and heartless. They may not be telling you, but internally they question themselves. Maybe I am a cold and heartless person. I don't know. Um, but the point is that there's some truth about us. Like I always encourage conversations with the raw truth. And it's an uncomfortable place to be, but it's the only way to work through triggers. And the more you can approach this uncomfortable truth about yourself with compassion, the more that truth can come out and expose itself more to you. Let's talk about anger. Uh, let's, just like out of the box kind of thing. Um, why is this anger thing here? If you ask the anger piece, like, sometimes I'll use an analogy. I don't know if you saw The Wizard of Oz, where there's a person behind a curtain pushing buttons, pulling levers, and then you have this whole experience over here, but oh, wait, it's this thing over here that's causing it. So you can think of this little piece as like this little personality who's there, and they're pushing a button, and every time they push a button, you get angry. It's like, okay, a little Wizard of Oz. Are you wanting to hurt my partner? Start dialoguing with them. Are you wanting to hurt my partner? Are you wanting to hurt me? Are you wanting to hurt this relationship? When it comes to if you can manage to dialogue with this thing, it's going to come out that this little Wizard of Oz has your best interests at heart. Like, no, I'm not actually trying to hurt you. I'm actually protecting you. Hello. Uh, when did you start needing to protect me? Well, do you remember growing up when so and so was really critical with us and blah blah blah, or with you, and you felt despondent and blah blah blah, and so and so was angry, and then you know obviously anger is the way to express feelings, and do you remember how unjust the world was back then? I came in and I was created and I helped you get through those times. The more you can, with compassionate inquiry, the more you can dialogue with this aspect of yourself, this little Wizard of Oz, and see that they're on your side, and that whatever maladaptive behavior you have was born in the original school of life, was born out of benefit to you, out of protection to you. The coldness, the heartlessness, the withdrawal, the emotional, I'm too much, the I'm too emotional, all of it. The I'm too anxious, I'm too much of a people pleaser. Whatever you think your issue is, it was born out of protection and survival, and it's benefited you. The problem is, as an adult, now this little Wizard of Oz hasn't been updated. Ask them how old they think you are. A lot of times they'll say, "Oh, you're 8 years old. You're 15," and they're actually surprised when you say, "No, I'm actually 38." So it's a piece, it's a little aspect of you that carries a lot of pain. And as children, you're survivors. You learned to deal with that pain in a certain way. And whether it was learning to stuff your feelings for the sake of others, whether it was learning to express yourself more, just trying to, because that's, over emotional expression is the way you got some sort of attention from others, and some sort of attention from others, even if it was criticism or abuse, was better than no attention at all. So whatever it is, you have to find the benefit, work with it, dialogue with it. The Little Wizard of Oz doesn't actually want to be doing that job. That's the kicker. So, my whole point in all of this is I'll do another workshop on that just to focus on that, how you can work with yourself and these aspects of you is to be able to come into acceptance. We've become so fragmented in life, like, I'm anxious, I'm going to just push that piece over here. Oh, I'm angry, oh, I'm vindictive, I'm petty, like whatever your thing is. I can't commit to people. Oh, I cheat on people, like whatever it is, we push off these pieces and we become fragmented. And the whole point of integration and becoming a whole person is to actually pull these pieces back, embrace them, understand that they're rooted in well-meaning intentions. They helped you survive some pretty tough years, and have some appreciation for them. and it will start to lessen that hold on you to where over time you can give them a new job and start to stay in conflict a little bit longer, start to see yourself as a perhaps different person, more capable person, start to draw boundaries in the way that you've always dreamt of doing. But the personal work at some point, the triggers have to be addressed. Because if you're at a point where it's like, okay, we keep having the same fight over and over, we need to call it. If you haven't addressed your triggers, where the little wizards of Oz in your life, maybe you have a few of them, maybe you have one of them, maybe you have a few of them, the little wizards in your life, if you haven't addressed them, they will think, my work here is done. Good job, everyone. Good job, team. Who's the next person? Fine, break up with your partner. You will repeat the same pattern. I guarantee it. So now there's no time like the present to start looking at what's really behind your triggers. Everyone has them. Everyone has triggers. You're not broken because you have triggers. And everyone can change them. Neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to create new pathways, change the way you think, which then changes the way you feel. It takes practice. Like, look at all the conditioning in the original school of life and since. Look at all the decades that it took for you to arrive at your triggers, arrive at your lens in life. It makes sense logically that it'll take half a second to recondition yourself and create those new pathways. But it's possible. At any age, it is possible. So let's move on to the next question. Partner keeps bringing up past instances when she was hurt as examples when it relates to a new argument we are fighting about. Okay, this is a smaller way of pulling a fire alarm. Everybody does this. No insult to your partner, but pulling the fire alarm when you start to feel like your partner isn't hearing you fully. You start to feel like they're just not getting it. Then we become the most efficient attorney in the courtroom. Here, Your Honor, let me bring in all this evidence. Do you remember 3 years ago, on the street corner at Smith and, Jones, we had this argument, and then all this data comes from the database, and this is why this is a huge, and so, what happens a lot in arguments is the kitchen sink starts being thrown at the other person. Well, yeah, well, what about this? You remember when you did this to me, and then it becomes competitive, and then it becomes about who's going to win the argument. And part of my job with couples is to focus on one issue at a time. Because when you start to bring in multiple issues, now you're having 3 or 4 fights simultaneously. You're never going to resolve that. So that's not to say that things from 3 years ago on the street corner is not relevant. If that's clearly, it's still relevant because clearly you're still having resentment and it's coming out about it. So that deserves to be talked about, but try to stay focused on one issue at a time. Now, here's the tricky thing is that sometimes you are not always arguing about the same issue. So clarity on the issue is a good question to ask. Like, what are we arguing about right now? Because one person might be arguing about, well, I'm arguing that you aren't putting the dishes away in the sink properly, and or the dishwasher, or you aren't putting your dirty dishes away, period. And I've asked you a million times, and I don't see why you can't do it. And I almost feel like you're doing it on purpose at this point to like piss me off, like purposely. And it's hurtful, and the list goes on. So, and the other person might be arguing about your tone of voice. They might be arguing that you're treating them like a child and they're tired of this parent-child relationship. So you think you're arguing about the dishes in the sink and they're actually arguing about the way that you treat them, the whole parent-child relationship. So now it's like, you're never going to resolve that argument. So it's important to really zero in on what is the issue. And, when someone brings up past instances, these are examples of resentment. These are the seeds of resentment. All of these past instances need to be addressed, ideally on separate occasions, but I understand if it all gets thrown into the same bucket. But what happens when someone brings up past stuff is the other person brings up past stuff to counteract. And it's just like two attorneys arguing in a courtroom, pulling up evidence. So if you can try to redirect back to, okay, I understand that that past instance was hurtful. We'll talk about that. And I do want to talk about that. But right now, can we talk about the dishes in the sink? So that's what I would say about that, is try to keep the conversation focused on the issue at hand, and don't dismiss what they're saying about the past. Say, okay, I hear that that's still something we need to talk about, and let's talk about that in a minute. Can we finish this argument? Stay focused on this issue. And that's where people might get squirrely if they feel that they're cornered or they're losing the argument. Fire alarm gets pulled. Yeah, well, I feel that it's relevant, because you did this. And it's tough to keep people focused when you feel ashamed, when you feel any sort of shame response. And that's what happens a lot in conflict, is our shame responses get triggered. I think, like, I don't know, like 2/3 of conversations have some tinge of the shame that we feel in life. Where do we want to go for dinner tonight? I don't know, you decide. That is telling you that that person feels like their needs are too much. It's all about you. I want to please you. I don't deserve to come to the table. Hey, where do you want to go for dinner tonight? Oh, let's go to this restaurant over here. It just opened up. I heard it's the best restaurant. People are raving about it, and let's post social media photos about it. That person is saying that being the best, being at the cutting edge, always choosing the best option, always creating like the perfect experience for your partner is really important, because if you don't do that, then what happens? Then you feel shame of not being the best, or not being the perfect partner, or not being the perfect relationship on social media. So, conversations can be really seemingly innocent, but shame has its way of just coloring all of our conversations. So especially in an argument, shame will come out. Uh, Okay. So, follow up to the earlier question about the mental abuse. It's the current relationship. But yeah, personal work for both sides. You're going to have a tendency to think you're the problem. But for both sides, personal work for sure. Okay, next. I'm told that I value or prioritize my sister more than her. More than your partner? I'm unable to understand this because my relationship with my sister, for instance, is a different kind of relationship. Yes, it is. So I'm told I value prioritize my sister more than her. Okay, I'm assuming that you're saying that your partner's saying you're valuing your sister's relationship more than you're valuing your partner. And you're saying, hey, this is my sister. Like, it's a family relationship. It's totally different from you. So this is interesting. I'd love to hear from your partner, but third-party relationships can create issues all the time. I use third-party relationships. I don't know if that's like a great term, but whatever. So, if you look at your relationship with your sister, is it possible that your partner has a point? Now, when they say that you prioritize your sister more, oh, has there ever been a time when, let's say, you're going out on date night and all of a sudden your sister calls with an emergency, and then you say, okay, we have to cancel date night because my sister has to do this and whatnot? I'm just throwing things out there. I'm not saying this is true, but for example, a person could feel like, this happens a lot with oldest children of immigrant families, where you tend to just pure need become a parental figure for siblings. Could be that even a parent abandoned the family, and then you kind of stepped in to help with the family and raise the children. And then you just become a little bit of more of an adult before you're ready, and you have kind of a perhaps maternal, paternal relationship with a certain sibling. And that, if there's any of that that's going on, just to your point, that is a different kind of a relationship. It's a very deep relationship. And there's opportunity, if especially if you're well into adulthood and your sibling, your sister is well into adulthood, there might be opportunity to start to let them be an adult. Um, to what would happen if you pulled back from that parental relationship with your sister. It's generally uh, both parties have signed on to that, but this is no small thing. Whatever bond you have with your sister was necessary. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. You're very, I'm sure, nurturing, and your sister depends on you a lot. But now you're in a romantic relationship and you have to balance the needs of your partner with your sister. And it can be done, but I don't know. I think there's opportunity to see if the relationship with the sister can be modified. We're not throwing out the relationship with the sister. We're not like ignoring her. We're not doing any of that, but can be modified with the lens of, whoa, I feel like I'm her mother. I'm fully responsible for her. If I draw any sort of boundary with my sister, I will be unloving. I will be abandoning her just like our parent abandoned us. I'm not doing that to my sister, which is great, but you're going to have to learn to navigate the needs of your partner with your sister. Now, also, we don't know your partner. I don't know your partner's original school of life, where they came into a relationship with the lens of, I fear I'll be abandoned. And then any sort of little thing you're doing could be little mini instances of abandonment, mini MINI, many small experiences of abandonment, micro abandonment. Whenever you do this, whenever you do that. So for both sides of the partnership, there's always two sides of the story. From both sides of the partnership, there might also be opportunity for your partner to be less threatened by the relationship with the sister. What is proof to your partner that, here's a good question for your partner. What's proof to your partner that you prioritize them at least equally with your sister? And see what they say. So, okay, next question. Never feel truly loved enough, never feel heard. It's a common experience. What would be, and with the emotion and the sentiment that you said that with, just I can feel the hole in your heart, and that feeling of longing to be loved, to feel validated, to feel heard, to have like eye contact, focus attention, prioritization in someone's life. I could feel the hole in your heart from not having that. And, when we talk about a loaded gun, just having more understanding for the circumstances that created that loaded gun of, I'm never loved enough. I am never heard. What happened? The pain from our past, it's like some people don't want to talk about it, but when you can socialize your pain, and this is the importance of community, and I promote this a lot, having a best friend, having, maybe it's family, having, it doesn't have to be a lot of people, but having at least someone or some people, like a group of friends who have your back, who will listen to you talk about your pain, where you talk about your pain and you come to the realization that even though in the original school of life, those people couldn't give you the experience of feeling loved enough, feeling validated and seen and heard and appreciated and given attention, even though those people couldn't, for whatever reason, give that to you, that at least you have people in your current life who can give that to you. And the more evidence that you can get in your current adult life of that experience, the better. But I don't know your current relationship situation, but I imagine that early in your adult dating life, you probably gravitated towards that familiar kind of dynamic of people who just weren't quite loving enough, weren't quite present enough with you, weren't quite engaged enough with you. And the more you can um, tie the pieces together of like, oh, that's why I chose those relationships. That's what I was seeking. That's the hole in my heart that I was trying to fill. totally understandable. And um, I can actually surround myself. I get to choose now who I surround myself with. And it is a good goal to want attention. And it's healthy to want attention and to feel heard. And I'm going to find someone who's going to do that. So, but I appreciate you sharing that. Just the sadness and the longing really comes through. So the way through that is that's the tough part, easier said than done, right? Of finding people who or a partner who could do that for you. It'll over time fill that hole in your heart. But you have to also acknowledge where the hole came from. Just as they say, process that. Okay, another comment. Yes, head in the sand is a good way to describe it. Asian immigrant parents. Yep, Asian immigrant parents. They do the best they can. Where people are, we have to be taught everything that we know. So if even as a culture, you're not taught that emotions are important, feelings are important, that we need to spend time talking about feelings, um, more head in the sand, be accomplished, be successful, don't spend time on those silly feelings. These are values. These are values that get handed down from generation to generation. And so I don't know if you're in the United States or not, but at least in this country, there's more of an emphasis on, especially with the younger generation, feeling your feelings. And I know, like, when I grew up, the idea of therapy was like, not just socially, but also within my immediate family, is like, oh, the crazy people go to therapy. But it's changed so much in the decades since I was younger about being open to therapy and doing personal work. And I think it's amazing. I think it's wonderful. I think, this shows the evolution of understanding our massive brains and understanding how emotions and emotional experiences affect our life. The whole idea of suffering is something you can change. It's a wild notion, to when people started focusing on the potential of psychology and therapy. And anyhow, so that's a tangent. Um, yeah, Asian immigrant parents. So they have their values. And now just you being here or you noticing that head in the sand and referring it to that way, like, hey, that's a bad thing. You're telling me that you might be breaking away from cultural traditions, might be breaking away from family values of like, no, I think it is valuable to talk about my feelings. And no, I think this is good. And I want to do this. And I want to adopt this as my personal value. Even though my family and my culture uh, don't really see it that way, I see it this way. So, you know, there's going to be something in your DNA that'll you'll be challenged with to some degree, but you can stop the generational cycle, whatever that cycle is, and carve out your own path. But just understanding your roots, your original like origin story, um, it's it's interesting to notice how just as a culture, some people how they approach emotions. So. Okay, and a follow-up to that, yes, my partner says I'm bad at taking criticism. You're correct that I was a golden child growing up. There you go. Golden child is just like the worst prison possible, is it not? Where you, over the years, that box just gets smaller and smaller of what you can and cannot do. Perish the thought that you should ever ask for help. You don't need help. You're fine. You'll take care of it. So no one checks in on you. No one says, hey, what can I do for you? You're the one who always takes care of things and you're fine. You don't need emotional support. You're fine. So being a golden child is so restrictive. But you also like carried, like identified with it. Like, yeah, I am the golden child and this is my value. So when it comes to triggers are all about what is your value to the world? What is your value to people? It's going to be similar to what is your value to your partner. And when your partner doesn't recognize that value, uh, it's going to fall apart pretty quickly. Like if you're not recognized for the value of being perfect, then you're messing with my identity. You're messing with my worth in life. And so there's opportunity there to take that question of how am I valuable to others? Well, when I'm perfect, when I'm the golden child, when I take care of stuff, and when I don't express my feelings. Getting back to your perspective, is there a way to reframe how you are valuable? How do you want to be valuable in life? Some golden children, they are, they poke their head out. It's like, oh, I can express my feelings. And they tinker around and play with it a bit. And then they pop back into like golden child mode because it's too much. So you might decide that, yeah, I do want to reframe what my value is, or it might be too comfortable. Of nope, my golden child identity is set and I really don't want to mess with it. It's up to you. I am not here to tell people what their problems are. Exceptions being if harm is being placed upon someone else or to yourself. But I listen for people to tell me what the issue is. Why are we here today? What's an issue for you? So if you're telling me that you see how being a golden child is affecting your adult relationship, your romantic relationship, and I imagine your friendships. But with friendships, lovability isn't so much on the line as much as it is in a romantic relationship. If you're telling me that you see how it's affecting your relationship, you're telling me that you're open change. And so this is how it starts. So, how are you valuable to the world? How are you valuable to your partner? Do you believe that you can be valuable to your partner if you have a bad day and you need to depend on them? That'll really test you. So, what happens if you're dependent on others? They will reject me. They will fall apart. The world will fall apart. The family will fall apart. I don't get a day off. Um, it's just, you can do different thought experiments to kind of see how you would feel. But the biggest thing that will seed you shifting out of the golden child is evidence, where you depend on your partner just in a little way, just to start. Let them take care of you. It will be wildly uncomfortable for you. But in the end, will it be nice? I mean, I don't know a golden child who wouldn't want like their back rubbed or, like being taken care of and nurtured and, not being the nurturer for once, being able to have a bad day, be in a bad mood, being able to take time for yourself. Like, I don't know any golden child who secretly would not love that. But, it's one thing to love it and another thing to ask for it. Okay. Does empathizing or validating other person's perspective help prove that the other person is right? Great question. I love this question because this is one of the biggest blocks to empathy. Is that if you feel you're validating your partner, like, oh, I hear, so you're feeling hurt, you're feeling sad, you're feeling lonely. Yeah, I can understand why you'd feel that way. It's like a person's biggest nightmare because it's now like, oh no, I just validated their feeling. Now that just proves, what does it prove? Does it prove you're a bad person? Well, let's deconstruct this a little bit more. Feelings are the end of the road. Go back to the triangle. Your perspectives create your feelings. You, I don't know, you didn't text me on your work trip during the day. The feeling is I feel lonely. What are other perspectives of it? You didn't text me. This means you don't love me. You're going to reject me. You were cheating on me during this work trip. All of it. What are all the feelings? Lonely, anger, whatever, irritation, resentment. So you see just how they're intimately connected. So you come in and your partner expresses, hey, I felt, let's say they express it in like picture perfect emotions. Like, I felt, when you didn't text me, I felt lonely. I felt fearful that that I'm not a priority to you. I felt fearful that maybe you met somebody else, and so forth. Now, you as a person, if you validate lonely and fearful, there's this thing in everyone's brain that says, whoa, I'm validating their thoughts as well. But that's not true. And this is the important distinction that will help help release the blocks of empathy is you're validating their emotions, not their thoughts and perspectives. And that's why when you can communicate in emotions and not thoughts, you're going to have a better chance of being validated. And you, as the validator, remember that you're validating their emotions, but you don't have to validate like the wacky way that they got there. Hey, when you wore that yellow sweatshirt, I felt really fearful because it meant that you were going to criticize me, because my dad always wore yellow as his favorite color and he criticized me all the time. So when you wore yellow, like I felt really fearful of you, actually. Could you not wear yellow? So even if the logic is not appropriate to you, like I would never hurt you. I would never, like let's make it more extreme. I would never abuse you like your father did just because I'm wearing yellow. You can still validate the emotion of fear. Oh, so empathy is paraphrasing, mirroring is paraphrasing. So you felt fearful when I was wearing yellow. You felt fearful because it reminded you of your dad. It's like, oh. You think about you put empathy, put yourself in their shoes. You can walk a mile in their shoes. Oh, I can see why, I can understand actually why yellow would be triggering for you. You're not validating that you did have the potential for abuse and harm just because you were wearing yellow. You're not validating that, but you're validating the fear. So this is a great question. It's a question that everyone has. It's the thing that blocks empathy is that I don't want to validate your wacky logic, your logic that says I'm a bad person. I'm not going to validate that. So we withhold everything. But if you can just hone in on their emotions and just validate that piece, then it's going to move out of the inertia. So great question. Can you speak to tips about resolving conflict if you have disorganized attachment? Same thing. Disorganized attachment is when you have a combination of both things, where given a certain day, actually, it's given a certain person. If the person is acting more in an avoidant way, you tend to become more anxious. If they act in a more anxious way, you tend to become more avoidant. So if you have traits of both pretty strongly and consistently, you probably have more what they call fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment, but we don't have to get into labels. But just recognizing it doesn't matter about labels. Just look at how you approach conflict. What are your triggers in conflict? It's the same for everybody, whether you're whatever insecure attachment you have, whether it's avoidant, anxious, disorganized. It's how do you respond to conflict? What are your triggers? What are your needs? What do you need to hear? How can you express yourself? But just understanding your loaded gun and how that gun got loaded from your original school of life will give you a lot of perspective, because understanding how the loaded gun came into play will take pressure off of your partner. It'll take blame off of your partner. Or like I said, it's not that they're innocent and they're an angel and they did nothing wrong. They did something upsetting, granted, but the loaded gun is what fuels, emotional dysregulation, fuels our behavior on our worst day, fuels our fight or flight and inability for executive function and hearing and listening and speaking and communicating effectively. It affects everything. So we have to understand the loaded gun. So, and it's not better or worse with disorganized attachment. It's just different. So, but if you have a more specific question about how you feel your disorganized attachment plays out, I'm happy to answer that. Okay. Really appreciate your thoughtful explanation and helping reframing of things with respect to conflict and getting better with feedback, especially the notion of getting better at feedback to increase stamina. Yes, just, whenever we're trying to improve something, it's not that, say your partner wants to talk it out until it's resolved. It's like, all right, maybe long term that's a great goal, but let's be realistic. When you're trying to change behaviors, first thing you need to do is understand the benefit of your behavior. So you shut down. So you want to get out of the room right away whenever there's conflict. Okay, getting back to the compassionate inquiry. Let's talk with the little Wizard of Oz. Do you understand why they compel you to do that? Of course you do, because it was very protective. It helped get you through some really rough years. So you don't need to berate yourself about being a cold and heartless and shut down robot of a person and uncaring and not nurturing and unloving. You don't have to berate yourself like that. You can understand yourself with compassion inquiry of why you do that. Once you can understand why you do that, now you can shift it. Whatever behavior you have, whether it's addiction or anger or whatever behavior you have, once you have to start with understanding the benefit of it. Then you can start to massage it and shift it. It's like you work with it. It's like, oh, okay, you're not so bad after all. Come here, talk to me. Let's work this out. Then, as far as the behavioral part, see, now you're shifting your perspective. You're reframing your perspective. You're not a bad person. You're not a cold-hearted person. Now the reframe is like, oh, I'm just like a overly protective person of myself. So if I don't have to be as protective with this person in the present moment, now with the reframe, you get two different behaviors. So we're on this side of the triangle now, a different behavior. What's the behavior? Okay, it's still going to be uncomfortable, but I'm going to try to stay in this conversation 5 minutes longer than last time. Start small. I'm going to, and then next time I'm going to try to stay in it a little longer than, last time. So, we're pleasure seekers in life, all of us. We're, ease lovers. We want the easy way. And we feel like, okay, this is uncomfortable or I'm triggered, so it must mean that I just shouldn't be doing this. And we just follow our whims. We follow our feelings. And that's not what successful relationships are about. It's about discomfort. It's about navigating triggers. It's about white knuckling it to get to a better place behaviorally. But what will help is the top of the triangle. What's your perspective? Your view of the world creates your suffering. So, but thank you so much for that feedback. That's really helpful. Also, the push-pull dynamic you shared exactly describes our fights. Yes, I don't give empathy, so then she makes the fight escalate. Of course, it's like you're rejecting her all over again. You're just like bringing to light her original school of life. It's like replaying out again in, high definition color. And so again, two sides to every story. There's opportunities for both of you to just recognize the little wizards of Oz that are, motivating your behaviors, protecting you. They helped you get through those tough years in the past, but now the key is adaptability. You're no longer in the war zone of the past. You're with this person in the present. And so the ability to adapt, the ability to pivot, and the little Wizard of Oz will pivot with you, is critical. It's key. You're not fixed in who you are. You're not fixed as this hopeless, broken person. Research shows neuroplasticity. You can change your brain at any moment, and the brain is so key in creating your perspectives. It'll create your suffering. It'll perpetuate your suffering. It will lead you to behaviors that perpetuate suffering. The minute you can start to get a reframe, is it possible to look at this situation that's creating your suffering in any different way? And one of the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy says yes. And Viktor Frankl, he was in a concentration camp, lost his whole family. He found some way to find, I don't know if you can ever say peace, but acceptance. So it's always possible to reframe. It's always possible to look at a situation in a different way. Work with your triggers. It's key to everything. Okay. Yes, there have been instances where I unintentionally prioritized my older sister's needs over my partner's needs. Unintentionally. See, you're wanting to just express that you're a good person. You are a good person. You can put that to rest. You don't need to prove, at least to me, that you're a good person. You're navigating the needs of a sister who I imagine felt in some way really abandoned by her family, your family, one or two people in your family, maybe the whole family, who knows? And you're filling that role for her, and it's a really important role. You just have to learn how to navigate the needs of her and your romantic partnership. And your partner says a romantic partnership should be the highest priority. So again, this is up to you. I'm not here to tell you how to prioritize your values. So, because it's not just as simple as, okay, your romantic partner and your sister, like this person should be more important than this person. It's more complex than that. You and your sister have a whole history. I don't know any details about it, but trust me, there's a whole history there. You've been to hell and back with her. And it's a special relationship, but you also have to learn to navigate the needs of your partner. So, and you can do it. You've got love to give for a very long time. So, okay, that's the end of the question. Sorry it went long again. I get very chatty, go on my tangents, but this was a good indication or a good example of what we'll be going through in depth at my weekend retreat in October in Palm Springs, California. So a lot of how to work through triggers, labs in the afternoons to where you work with each other, with me and my coaches walking around the room and helping you to practice empathy, practice the mirroring, get that in your muscle memory, practice how to work with the little Wizards of Oz, and just do it in a really focused way throughout the weekend where you get momentum and create some permanent shifts. Whatever your problem is in your relationship, it can be shifted. I really believe that. And I'm not like a fluffy kind of person. I like hard evidence, and I've seen a lot of evidence for what this looks like and the roadmap around it. And there can be structure and logic and to get all your needs met.